Cashomaniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
Welcome to episode 219 of the GeoGearHeads. I'm Daryl W4, and unlike last week when I had my venerable co-host, the Bad Cop, we have someone standing in for him this week, some weird Canadian guy. What's his name again? The Land Monkey?
Something like that, yeah. Well, yeah, definitely weird and Canadian. Yeah, that makes sense. But how different is that from the Bad Cop other than the Canadian part?
Well, I was going to say the Canadian is definitely very different. The weird part, not so much, though. I think you have to make some worse jokes than usual.
Yeah, the silly puns.
Yeah, the silly puns kind of factor into that. And for those of you who didn't recognize that, the voice is that of Antaeus.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Great to have you on. And our last guest for today is going to be Fad
Really?
Cortez 427.
How's it going?
Apparently, I'm getting really tongue-tied, but I promise I'm doing a lot better than I was last week. If nothing else, I don't have the wrong Hangout open.
That's always a good sign. I'm not sure. I might just call you Taz for the rest of the show because I'm not sure I can pronounce your full name the way Daryl did.
Oh, Taz is fine.
Oh, boy.
Half the people say the 427 wrong anyways.
How'd you say 427 wrong?
427.
Oh,
The
got it.
connotation. So it's after a 427 Shelby Cobra, 1965 427 Shelby Cobra.
Nice.
See, now we're digging in a little bit more. And if anyone doesn't recognize that voice from the geocaching podcast, they haven't been listening since I left the show. Well, today's topic is 3D printed caches. We've talked about this a few times before, twice to be exact. And Antaeus says, returning, Taz, you're coming back for the first time to talk about the 3D printed caches, and we asked our listeners to send us some questions and comments and that kind of stuff, and boy, did we get a lot of good stuff. And Antaeus, you were actually kind enough to offer up a 3D printed cache to the winners, so who is that person that was selected as the winner?
It's DSV Music.
Congratulations, and we'll get in touch, get the address and everything, and get that out to you. But why don't we actually kick it off with his question?
Hey GeoGearHeads, this is DSV Music, long-time listener, first-time caller. Hey, my question about 3D printed caches is, what's the largest 3D cache you've ever printed? How long did it take to print, and how much material did it use? Well, that's 3 questions, I guess, but oh well, can I get 3 entries? All right, thanks so much. Have a great time, guys. Bye.
No, sorry, you only got 1 entry, or 2 entries actually, because that was a voice comment. But Antaeus, we'll start off with yours. What was your biggest, longest 3D printed cache?
Okay, I don't know about longest, but it's certainly the biggest one that I've done so far, and I haven't published it yet because we're still working on getting everything together. There's going to be several pieces, but I mean, you are familiar with this part of it. It's the gnome, and this is my version. This is supposed to be like my father-in-law with the red beard and everything. So this is going in this guy.
Oh my goodness.
Right here. This is well, what I call a gnome home. So you can see it's a little bit bigger than my head. Definitely wider. It's probably about, I don't know, maybe 14, 15 inches tall, about a foot, maybe 11 to 12 inches, or I mean 12 to 13 inches wide. My wife's not done with the painting of it yet, so this is not what it's going to look like when it's published, but she recently added the moss on the roof here. So it's supposed to look like a little mushroom with fungus and all that stuff. And so there's going to be a location at my in-laws' house, hence the coloring of the gnome with the red beard. Here's the other. This is Nana, and this is Gumpy. So these are all going to go together, and there's going to be some other stuff, and it's going to be like a little gnome hobble. It should be pretty cool. Like I said, we're still working on it. We got a lot to do, but the roof portion, I had to print the roof portion in, I want to say, 6 different pieces, put it together. The base, the actual home, that was one single piece, and it took 30 hours to print. So all in all, I want to say it was probably 60 to 70 hours for the whole, just the gnome home itself, and then all the other pieces, another, I don't know, maybe 12 hours. And then I still have furniture that I'm going to do. There's going to be some lawn furniture out front, and it's going to be pretty intricate. You know, it's been, well, I had the roof actually printed when I was on the show the last time. I don't know if you recall, but it was pink. I had to print it with pink filament because that's the only thing I had at the time that I had enough of. So anyway.
All right, Antaeus, we know you're just fishing for favorite points now.
I bow down to you. That was very impressive.
That is amazing.
It's
Anybody who's listening to the audio, you got to go back and check the video to see that. That's fantastic.
I was going to say, this is probably one of those shows that you're going to want to check out on video. And Limax is complaining in the live Q&A that he left his 3D glasses at work. But Limax, don't worry, this is not 3D enabled video yet. If so, we'd have to put some extra warnings, I think, on here. But yeah, the whole thing with 3D printing like a fairy garden seems like that's, anyone who's into those fairy gardens would be all over that. So, nice work there, and it can just get all kinds of great ideas going. Taz, how about yours? Do you have anything that you can talk about?
The largest that I printed was kind of a cylinder shape that was about maybe 3 inches in diameter by 5 inches tall, and then kind of the locking mechanism to pull out. Just something I pulled off of Thingiverse, and the one that I designed myself though was this guy right here. Kind of looks like a mud-dauber nest, and on the back I've got magnets, and in the bottom I've got a bison tube that's plugged up in there. That way it doesn't get all soaked, because as anyone who's 3D printed something with threads, we know that those aren't waterproof.
No. Well, and it should be mentioned probably that in all of these cases, you're not taking that 3D printed model and sending it out there. You're actually doing other things, and you can't print, for instance, magnets into a 3D printed thing. You have to have those added in. You can't print a magnet.
Right. So basically had holes in the design there, put the magnets inside, and then this was done with ABS printer material, and so I took some acetone with some of the green ABS that I had, and mixed it up a little bit and made a little bit of glue and glued them in there.
Nice.
And then I spray painted it over the top with the textured spray paint that kind of makes it look like something that nature might have produced.
Very cool.
Yeah, thank you, by the way, for sending that to me, the file. I'm going to definitely put that out there sometime. Going to do the same thing.
All right, so Indiana Darrell has a good question, and that is, what is the final product of a 3D printer called? Example, if I printed a picture on my color printer, it's called an image, photo, picture, or print. If I printed words, it could be called a document, letter, or page.
Chad, do you want to take this, or I got an answer, but I'll let you talk.
I just call it the object.
Yeah. So object, thing, model. Those are really the 3 nouns I have to describe them.
Well, I think most often I hear them just called 3D prints.
Yeah.
It is a 3D print. Multiples is 3D prints. I don't know that anyone has anything better, but there was definitely a push for a long time to call them things, but I don't think that went over too well. Limax, by the way, in the live Q&A says it's time for someone to work on the replicator so you can put magnets in it. And I have actually heard of people putting pauses in their print jobs to do just this kind of stuff. Like they'll put they'll print the holder for like a circuit board and then drop the circuit board in and then 3D print around it so that it's sealed in.
That's interesting.
So it can be done. It just requires a little bit of intervention.
All
You
right.
want to do it quick too because the extrusion starts to drip.
Uh-huh. Well, speaking of things dripping, and Chad, you talked about this a little bit earlier. We've got a question from Dano at Team Pugach, and his question is, how do you make the 3D printed objects watertight?
Hey guys, it's Dano of Team Pugach, and my question for Antaeus and Taz about 3D printed geocaches is, how do you make those things watertight? Are you buying rubber gaskets or O-rings at the hardware store and putting that on the threads for where they close? Because I know absolutely nothing about 3D printing, and all I can think of is spun fiber. Okay. So is that like laser weaving or something? But yeah, I want to know how you keep them watertight, and look forward to listening to the show and finding out.
Yeah, there's a couple things that you can do. One of them you mentioned is O-ring, so you can design it so that it can take an O-ring and you put it in. When you screw it down there, it actually compresses the O-ring so it keeps the water out. It depends on your print quality, though. You still might have water making it through the layers, and so if you have something that you can coat the outside of the material as well to prevent it from making it through the layers. And in the case of ABS, maybe taking some acetone and painting it, kind of smoothing it across there, that kind of helps to seal those up as well. Another option is like what I did here, is putting a bison tube in there so that it has something that actually is normally watertight, so that you don't have to deal with that. And a third option is to don't worry about it being watertight and use some Write in the Rain paper.
Good point. So this is what I normally use after, most of the objects that I'm doing, we're painting, we're using an acrylic paint, but then we're sealing it with Krylon Crystal Clear. And it seemed to hold up in most cases for me, and I've got a few that have been out there for almost 2 years that are doing pretty well. Now, if, say, there's a storm and, branches are falling down and, the object gets nicked, paint's going to come off, that sealant's probably going to come off, so, reapply them. But this stuff usually works pretty well. There is this one particular object that I like, the way that it's designed. It's got the threading, and I've talked about this one before. I've used this in many of my objects. Like this bird right here that I've made. You can't really see it. It's white right now. But I just stick that thing within the other thing, and it's got such a lip on here that you're not going to get much water seepage in there. And I put an O-ring down there at the bottom most of the time. So I think also your design plays a part. And I mean, obviously, these things are, as Chad said, with the layers, they're not watertight. They're going to soak in some moisture, so you got to coat it with something.
And I think your environment's going to play a factor as well. So
Very true.
When I was living in Houston, the heat and the humidity that we have there, the paper would suck all the moisture in. But if you're in a drier climate, it might not be so bad.
Yeah.
Well, that answers pretty much the question from our next caller, I think.
Hi, this is Shermanator18 from New York. I've actually had the opportunity to use a 3D printer at my work a lot lately, and what I've noticed is that the parts tend to absorb any liquid that is around it, So my question is, what are you doing to prevent any water from getting into caches that you're printing on a 3D printer?
So I wonder if she's using PLA for that, because I think PLA tends to absorb a lot more moisture than ABS. You could use a different filament type. Going to ABS, for example, over PLA, and then as what Jeff mentioned, using some acrylic sealant helps.
Excellent, great answers and good questions. I always find that a challenge because I found the same thing that you guys have talked about, that you can print threads, but then they really just become a wicking device. So that's awesome. We've got another question that came in from Indiana Darrell, and that is, what are the different types of plastic used for 3D printing? And are there any that are unbreakable?
I wish there was one that was totally unbreakable. That would be awesome. I've had a few cache containers that have broken over time. But the two main plastics that you're going to use are PLA and ABS. And you know, there's advantages over both. You know, PLA has more ultraviolet resistance than ABS does. As Chad said, PLA is going to absorb the moisture more. It's also, it could get, well, both of them can get pretty brittle over time. There's other types of materials that you can use. There are PET is, you know, the stuff that bottles are made out of. That stuff is actually pretty strong. Unfortunately for me, I don't have a heated build plate, not yet at least. So I can't print PET. You have to have a heated build plate, otherwise, you know, it's just going to warp.
Well, that actually answers most of the question from Limax, who said in the live Q&A, are PLA and ABS the only two types of filaments?
Oh, there's even more.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, and if I remember from other podcasts I've listened to, it is still very dependent on your extruder and the printer as to what you can actually do and do well.
Yes, definitely. And you know, there's everything from nylon to wood to chocolate. I mean,
yeah. Well, and the way that the chocolate isn't going to run through your 3D printer that you're going to get for that. It has to be a chocolate 3D printer. Right. But there's like the metallic threads as well, the metallic filaments, and what they're doing with some of these materials is it's actually bits of this other product, the wood, the metal, inside of that. I think they're usually doing PLA for those.
Yeah, that's correct. They're usually a PLA blend with copper, brass. They even have cement, bamboo. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that they've mixed with PLA. Right. Actually, I had read about PLA and PHA. So that's apparently one of those that is a lot stronger. It doesn't get as brittle as just your normal PLA. So I got a box of that stuff that I haven't tested yet, only because my printer's inoperable at the moment. I got to change the cables on the jumper cables on the X-axis crimped, and so now everything prints like that. Kind of like that.
It's a 1D printer, 2D printer.
Yeah, it's a 2D right now.
And this is all talking about the most common style of 3D printer. We're not talking about some of the other ones like the DLPs where it's actually a resin-based. Yeah. This is the filament-based that we're talking about. If you get into some of those resin-based ones, there's other ones. And then, you know, some people will even refer to some of the CNC-type machines as 3D printers, so you can do all kinds of weird stuff with that. But, yeah, they are using the same basic technology to do things like print in cement. And one of the cooler pet projects that someone had was they built a castle out of cement. It looks kind of like a sandcastle from a home-built printer
Nice.
In his backyard.
Wow.
All right, let's move on to our next call-in question.
Hi, Antaeus and Taz. I've got 2 questions for you guys. One, I'm trying to make a codex on my printer, a Replicator 2, but I'm having trouble with the collars not fitting in each other. They seem to be, the inner ones seem to be getting wider at the tops. Any suggestions on a fix? And my second question is, in regards to the ABS 1.7 mil plastic, I've got 2 cache containers out. One is in the wild in Canada and is standing up to the elements fairly well, but is getting a little brittle. The other one is safe and sound in Daryl's studio. Any thoughts on using the new carbon fiber filament? Is it stronger? Does it get brittle in the cold? Any suggestions would be a great help. Thanks, guys.
Okay, so I got a couple of thoughts on that. Well, first, I'd definitely give the carbon fiber a try. I haven't done it myself, but it's always worth a try to give new filament types work out and see what is good about it. Also, the forums are a good repository for getting information about what people think of the materials. But as far as getting things that don't quite fit right, if you can get, I assume you got a hold of the model, so use a CAD tool to slightly shrink, and you don't want to do it on a 3D axis shrink. You want to do it on the axis that you're wanting to shrink. So if it's printed on a base, kind of a tube shape going upwards, you want to do it on that XY, not the Z axis, but shrink it just a little bit so that it fits in there. And that, that's one thing that you can do. The other thing, of course, is get the old file out. I mean, I've had to file threads, all kinds of different things in order for things to get an exact fit. It depends on if you need a tight fit or not. But if you don't need that tight fit, shrink it down a little bit.
Yep. What I normally do is I end up sanding it down. I don't want to go through the whole process of printing it out again, wasting the filament. So if something's not fitting right, I sand it down. I'm going to seal it anyway. Problem with sanding it down, you don't want to do it too much because more than likely you didn't print it with 100% infill. You
Right.
probably did 10 or 20 or whatever. So if you sand it too much, you got that Dremel out or something, you're gonna tear it open and it's gonna be hollow inside, and you're gonna have this big gaping hole. So you gotta be careful. Use the file, maybe sandpaper. I usually use a pretty fine one. Also, I actually reached out to him and asked him what model he was printing, and he got it off of the Thingiverse. It was called. Let me see, what was it called? The Combination Safe 00. And I actually had that in my collection, and I thought that's the one that I had printed out. Turns out it's not. I think I printed out the same one that you were showing there a minute ago, Land Monkey, which I think I got from one of your shows with the guys in the makerspace. I printed out that same one, and I've been having trouble getting it to work right. So I'm having to sand it down as well. Also, on that same model or object, go back to the thing page on Thingiverse, because the creator of that, Savage Rodent, he has gotten a lot of complaints about the pieces being too tight so that it wouldn't work, which sounds like what you're having an issue with. And he's actually gone back and redesigned some of the parts. So you may want to go back and check and see if some of those parts that you're having trouble with have been redone.
That's definitely great advice, and yeah, I'm sharing this one here. Anybody who's watching the video can see it. It is the exact same one Ante is talking about. I actually borrowed this from Team Kiwi, my friend at the Makerspace, just for the show tonight. And so this is one that he made, and he did exactly what you guys are talking about. He printed off the pieces, tried dry fitting them. They were too tight.
Yeah.
They weren't going to work. So what he did is over the summer he sat on his deck with a beer and sanded.
Yep, that's what I've been doing. Exactly. Except for the winters here are very nice. So let's start a little fire out there and start sanding and drink a beer or some wine. So yeah, I'm doing that on the very same one.
Fantastic.
And I'll probably be doing that in the future on the very same one.
Yeah,
it's a great design. It just needs that extra little work afterwards. But it's good to hear that as you're sharing that the architect of the design is coming back and having a little more attention to it. Hey, we've got another question here, and this is a question that I threw into the notes. And the question is, where do you guys get your design ideas? Do you get them from Thingiverse? That's where I tend to go. But also, another question is, what software do you use to do we'll call it CAD work?
Can I go back? I'm sorry. Can I go back to Billy's other question about the carbon fiber filament? From what I've seen, like Chad, I haven't had a chance to try it out yet. And one of the things that has made me reluctant to try some of these filaments, these PLA blends, is because they're with usually a more abrasive material, and they're going to damage your extruder unless you go out. I mean, if you want to replace your extruder like every couple months, then don't worry about it. Spend that $150, whatever it is, change it out. But what you can do is go get there are extruders that you can purchase that have a slightly larger diameter and are also made out of steel instead of, what are these made out of? Aluminum, I believe. So they're going to be more resistant to that abrasiveness of those filaments that have the metals, the concrete, that sort of thing in it. And also that carbon fiber filament, I hear, is very brittle before it's printed. So when it's on the spool, it's really, really brittle, and it'll snap like spaghetti. So when you're loading it, when you're feeding it, you want to be very careful so that you're not bending it too much. You don't want it to get jammed, when you're printing. That'd be pretty bad. But what I hear is that once it's printed, it is definitely more sturdy than just normal PLA, and it's better to use when you're doing like moving parts like gears, things like that. You're going to want to use the carbon fiber filament as opposed to a PLA or an ABS.
Yeah, good point on shortening the extruder head life. It really depends on what type of system you have as well, and what those extruders cost you. My stuff is off the shelf because I've got a home built 3D printer. But some of the higher end ones will cost you an arm and a leg to replace an extruder.
Yeah. Okay. Now back on to Land Monkey's last question. So I get most of my stuff from Thingiverse, but I then modify it all to make it what I want it to be, some sort of container. And I'll throw in the geocaching. International geocaching symbol on those pieces, and I kind of make it my own in that respect. But I also, if I can't find something, like if I have a scene that I'm printing, like the fairy thing, the gnome thing, if I can't find it on Thingiverse, I go to I think it's called 3D Warehouse. It's a Google. It's part of SketchUp. Which is a CAD software, so that's another answer to your second question there. And I think there's another one out there that I'm drawing a blank on right now.
Tinkercad.
Well, yeah, definitely. I was thinking of where I get the 3D objects. Mainly it's Thingiverse, but 3D Warehouse, and then I thought there was another one that I'm drawing a blank on right now.
Yeah, there's a few other options out there, and
yeah.
Thingiverse is the biggest, but I've heard the other one that I can't think of as well actually has better quality models. Because one of the problems with Thingiverse is people are doing the designs and they're not actually necessarily printing them.
Yeah, that's
or
true.
they're from the early days of 3D printing when people didn't care so much about the quality. It was more about learning to print.
Right.
So they're not necessarily as robust as they should be. So there's all of those kind of things that you can also run into and have to worry about.
Yeah, I take a lot of my stuff from Thingiverse and then pull it into either use Google SketchUp to modify it, or use Tinkercad.
Yeah.
I've kind of fallen in love with Tinkercad. It's an online CAD program that is very simple to use, even simpler than SketchUp. And it has a nice tutorials to walk you through how to design different things to print. So, and there's also some amount of stuff there that you can browse on Tinkercad to get other people's designs and take them and modify them. But yeah, that's primarily what I use.
Yeah, that is my go-to is Tinkercad, because I'm just getting in there to modify existing objects.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have on Thingiverse, actually there's a link somewhere on there for I think they call it the Thingiversity, so that you can take tutorials for some of the different CAD software. So Tinkercad, a couple others that I had actually not even heard of. I just noticed this today. But some of the other ones are Onshape, Autodesk Fusion, I believe it's called, Autodesk Fusion 360. And most of these you can get for free. The Autodesk tells you that you're only gonna have a 30-day trial, but then you say, I'm a student or an enthusiast, a hobbyist, and they'll give it to you for free. So that's pretty cool. You know what? I also had another thought back for Billy about the PLA. I'm sorry to go back.
It's a time traveling show as well. This is great.
Yeah. Well, I see Daryl has that TARDIS back there, so we're just going to hop in that real fast. So there is one that I would love, a filament that I would love to try, because and actually, this goes back to one of the other original questions, the unbreakable filament or plastic. The strongest that I've heard of so far is called the Tallman Blueprint Copolymer, and again, you have to have a heated build plate. It's going to be tough on your extruder, so it's not something that I've tried before, but it's supposed to be extremely strong. Just wanted to add that in there, just in case Billy has a printer that he can try that on.
There you go, GeoGearHeads. The thread, the filament through the show is all connected.
All right, we're going to move on, though, because we do have a bunch more questions coming up.
Hello, Daryl, Chris, and Teus, and Taz427. This is Limax out in the San Francisco Bay Area, calling in a question for question 219 on 3D printed caches. Question I really have is, when you are going to print a cache, do you already have a specific spot in mind, or do you print the cache and then try to find a spot to make it fit? I'm just curious what the thought process is behind when you are going to print a cache.
You want to take this one?
I usually don't have a place in particular in mind. I might have an idea of, in general, what I want to do, just like with the mud dauber cache. I know I want to hide it in an area where someone's going to have to look hard up underneath something, and they're going to see that and kind of almost be repulsed by it. It's like, oh, that's a nasty bug nest, and I want to get away from that. And then, acorn ones, of course, hanging in a tree, but I don't have a particular tree in mind. Now, if I was doing something like Jeff here, I would with that awesome gnome house, I would probably already have something planned out, but I'm not that creative.
Well, part of it comes from my wife too. She's pretty creative. For that particular containers or objects for the gnome home, I definitely had the place in mind first, and then I kind of looked through Thingiverse for things, for objects, and I found that was supposed to be a little birdhouse. It's just maybe about this big. Definitely a lot smaller than what I ended up printing it as. And I modified it so it had a door for the gnome so I could sit the gnome inside. And but yeah, I totally had the location picked out first for that one. I had created a R2-D2 cache container around the time the movie was coming out, Force Awakens, and I was sending it up to Gary of Cache and Release, and the first one I created turned out that like the head wouldn't line up properly, because the head, you actually screw off the head to open up the container to get to the log. So, but it wouldn't line up correctly, and so his head wasn't facing forward. So that container became my container. And so I was trying to find a place here in San Antonio to hide it, and I found the perfect location, kind of. There's a restaurant, Dick's Last Resort, on the Riverwalk, and they have a trash can that's painted as R2-D2. So I was going to try and hide it there or nearby, but it turned out that there was a cache already, within 1/10 of a mile, so I couldn't do it. And you know what? That cache that's 1/10 of a mile away, it's not owned by me, but I'm the one who actually placed it, so I can only blame myself for that one.
Archive it.
Well,
I can. It's not mine.
We did get an email from someone about his experiences 3D printing caches.
Hi there. This is Ed to Ed from Hertfordshire in the UK. I thought you might like to hear my experiences of using 3D printed objects as part of a cache series I placed last year. I'm lucky enough to have a work colleague with a 3D printer at home, and he was very enthusiastic about my ideas when I discussed them with him. Instead of having a custom printed cache container, my idea was to place 6 unique time crystals inside small caches that were located by solving a variety of puzzles. The crystals were printed using different coloured PLA filament to about 12 centimetres in length. I wanted the classic long pointed quartz crystal shape, and I found a design I liked on the Thingiverse website. But in the end, we found that it was easier to design it from scratch by starting with a tall and thin square-based pyramid, and then chamfering off slices at the thick end to make the desired crystal effect using CAD software. It worked really well. Then each crystal had an alien symbol embossed on one of the faces to be used in the puzzle to locate the cache series final. We found that this was easiest achieved by finding an existing font set and then recessing the character into the crystal face to leave a hollow shape when it was printed. The final part of the process was to work out the best percentage for the fill-in lattice. We made several test runs and settled on about 70 to 80% fill in the end. Any less and we found the top layer wasn't smooth enough. I'm really pleased with the final products, and my colleague charged me only for the filament that he used, which was so cheap that I paid double just for his time and effort. The crystals were well received by my cache finders, and I've just started chatting through some ideas for 3D printed objects to put in my next cache. That's all. Happy caching. This is Ed to Ed signing off.
Well, thank you, Ed to Ed. And, I went back and forth a little bit on email with him talking about some of the new translucent PLAs that are out there and thought, how cool would this have been if you actually printed in like a solid PLA the clue inside of the crystal that you then print around it. Oh,
that would be
would
awesome.
that would be a mess though to try to probably produce.
Well, you have a dual extruder. You can do that pretty easily.
Yeah, I'm sure you could. It's not impossible to do that with a single extruder, and then you don't have to worry about the mess of dual extruders, because that's its own little issue. But for a while, dual extruders were the big thing, and one of the big reasons for the dual extruder was the I can't remember the name of the material, but there was a material that was water soluble, so that you could print the supports in that, and then just drop the whole thing in water and not have to worry about the lines or anything else. But apparently that didn't work very well either. All right.
Seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yeah, exactly. It seemed like a good idea, but in reality, not so much. But Shermanator in the live Q&A wanted to know which printers the two of you actually use.
I use a kit from a company called Maker Farm. It's a Prusa i3 based design. So if you get into kit buildings, that's probably one of the more common 3D printing kits, and so it has a controller board with the full set of software, and you get to program and modify the code if you want, which is something that I've done personally with mine, so that I can adjust things a little bit better to my liking. And it's also a lot less expensive, but it took me about probably 20 some odd hours putting it together.
Yeah. I have one that was a gift from my wife. It's a MakerBot Replicator 2, so I didn't have to put it together. It was all there, ready for me to play with. Of course, that has it may be there and be ready to go, but there's a whole lot of learning you need to do.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of trial and error to consistently get good prints. And then I also have a M3D, which is this little teeny tiny guy right here, and I still have not yet used that. And then a 3D, the pin, I forgot what it's called, 3D Doodler, which, kind of cool for if you're going to patch up stuff. It's kind of neat. Fill in the little holes and the gaps that might happen from warping or whatever.
Shermanator says that she does have one of the Prusa printers at work, too.
Okay.
J6 family emailed, and they wanted to know what the cost of a 3D printer was and the other materials, and are there better 3D printers than others?
Well, you can get printers for as little as $300. This guy. That was something I got from a Kickstarter campaign, and then you can spend thousands of dollars on a printer. So there's a wide gambit or wide range of prices there. Chad, how much did yours cost?
Mine cost. This was years ago, a little over 2 years ago. I think it was about between $400 and $500 for the kit, and it's got a full heat plate. It's an 8x8 and gets about 8.5 inches vertical, and it does down to 0.1 millimeter or 0.1 on the layers, so it's fairly decent from that respect. It's not as quick as a lot of the maker bots, but it gets the job done.
Well, there's a wide range still, because it's still the Wild West for 3D printers. It's not at that spot yet where you can just expect to pick one up, put it down, and start printing and getting good stuff. There's a lot to learn. You have the models, who's going to produce the models for what you want and everything else. But listening to 3D printing today, it sounds like we finally have a hobbyist level bot that's getting close to that, like toaster, pull it out of the box and use it. And Tejas, you were looking at that one that they were just talking about on show 128.
Yeah, it's called the CraftBot Plus, and they, I believe his name's Andy. He got one for review, I believe, and he said it was just easy to use. Definitely would recommend it for a beginner. And it's a little over $1,000. It's got a heated build plate. It's a pretty good size build plate as well. There's another actually. Chad might like this one. It's called the Taz 5. It's by Lulzbot, and the Make magazine, they do a 3D printer review. I want to say they do it every year. They release a 3D printer guide, and that Taz 5 was the kind of like the printer of the year last year. So on all accounts, and they have different categories of things that they're looking at, and one of them is ease of use. So that might be something. I don't know if I made any notes about the cost. No, I didn't, of course. So I don't know how much that one cost, but they said that it was a pretty good intro one, and it was very good quality too.
Well, and until recently, it seemed like 3D Printing Today was recommending the PrinterBot Metal Simple.
Yeah, the Metal Simple.
Yeah, because it's as an entry level, there's a lot of stuff they don't like about it, but that one's only $600 US for the kit to build it, and then if you want to add in the heated build plate and get it up to an assembled model, it goes up to about $750. But it's a smaller build volume at only 6 inches cube. Versus like the CraftBot Plus is almost 10 by 8 by 8.
Yeah.
So you can print bigger things in these other ones. So there's a lot that you have to think about before you actually jump into one of these 3D printers.
And there's also different types of 3D printers. You've got the FDM, which are the ones like the MakerBots that are laying the layer of plastic over one layer on top of another layer, and then there's SLA, which is it's got a resin and it's shooting ultraviolet light in there and solidifying the polymers, I guess you would say. Mm-hmm. There's one that I would love to try. It's the Forms Lab Forms 2 printer. It just looks like a beautiful printer, and I really want to try a resin printer. I don't know what the cost of the resin is, and it looks like it would probably be pretty messy to deal with. But yeah. The prints that I've seen on those things just look beautiful.
Yeah, and that stuff's a little bit more hazardous to breathe too.
Yeah, and those, I think you're definitely not going to have it in your office at home. That I want to say that Forms Lab is $3,500. So it's pretty pricey.
Yeah, and these are the ones that are really seeming to catch the hobbyist builders' attention right now, because what they're doing is creating the printers based off DLP projectors. So by doing that, you get this really fine resolution because you get a 1080-ish panel on a projector, and use that to create your layers, and then it's just a matter of the speed that you move to give it the layer thickness, essentially. So you get a much smoother, cleaner print out of it than you do out of the FDM printers.
Yep, exactly.
But those are not the ones that you want to be putting caches out usually, because as I understand that resin tends to be a little bit more volatile too.
Yeah. Yeah, I do not have a clue about that type of material. I don't know how well it's going to stand up to the elements.
Yeah, well, this is all that additive stuff, but LandMonkey, we did have someone write in about something calling itself a 3D printer that's really more a subtractive process.
It is, and that came from our good friend Dano, Team Pugach. And the email said, "Have you seen this?" and included a link. Imagine what you could make for caching with it. Field puzzles, tools of the trade, geocoins. It's called the Glowforge, the 3D laser. And yeah, we did take a quick look at that before, our 3D laser printer. And we did take a quick look at that before the show. And I think the comment or the general consensus was it's not, in the sense of what we've been talking about up till now on the show, not a 3D printer. It is a subtractive device. But boy, to have one of those and have a good quality 3D additive printer, man, you're done. You got everything you need.
Yeah, it's more of a milling device, like a CNC. But man, that video, that was well produced, I gotta say. I mean, it just makes me want to get one of those. I don't want to spend the money on it because that too is like $3,000. Mm-hmm. But man, all the things that you could create. The geocoins, that's one thing that I thought about too. That's one of the first things that popped in my mind when I saw that. It's awesome.
All right, getting back to the FDM-style printers, so we did get a question about heated beds.
I'm Indiana Darrell from Northwest Indiana. My question to Antaeus and Taz 427 about 3D printing is, when looking at 3D printers, the ones with the heated bed have a price increase. My question is, what is the advantage to having a heated bed on a 3D printer?
So many more filaments you can use.
Yeah, you're and even with the filaments that you can get away without using a heated bed, the material tends to stick a lot better with a heated bed, and so I would definitely recommend getting one with a heated bed.
And since the bad cop's not here, I do have to ask, wouldn't everybody rather have a heated bed on a cold winter night?
Yeah, we got the pun in.
Hey, Daryl, what's up? It's Scott Burks here. Hey, Daryl. Hey, other guy. I see you guys are doing a 3D printed show, and I had a couple questions, and this is an actual question here. I'm not just getting anybody's goat. First of all, great show, guys, as always. Love your show. But in terms of 3D printing, I have a twofold question. Number one, where do you get the supplies to do 3D printing? I know it's plastics. Can you go to a Staples and buy that stuff? Where do you actually buy that stuff? And two, what's the cost involved in that? Is it like $10 a sheet, or is it like $10 you buy a pack of 12 kind of a thing? How does that work? I'm actually really curious on because I know on the cost involved in that, because I know a 3D printer is kind of expensive, but then if you're dealing with also the the plastic and all that, is that equally as expensive? Are you running up a bill of a couple $100s if you want to build something? So take here. Here's a question for Jeff. I think he's on the show. My TARDIS that you made me, which I adore and I love, and it's awesome. I love it. But what is the cost involved in that to build that TARDIS? Like, is it like $20? Is it like $10? $5? Actually curious. Not to know if you're a cheapskate or not. I'm just curious to know how much it costs. I'm sure other people want to know what's the cost involved in that plastic. So thanks, guys. Great show. Look forward to hearing the answer. Talk to you soon. Later.
Well, and I thought one of the ironies of this question was he asked about Staples, and Staples is trying to get into the 3D printers in a big way. So, yeah, in other words, yes, you can go down to Staples and grab it. Just
you can.
Most Staples.
Yeah, there are some office stores that are starting to carry a 3D the reams of filament, like they got an example here. 2 pound of ABS. This cost me probably $25 to $30. You can get them from Amazon as well. You got to really look into what the quality level is and what feedback other people have in there, because there's, just like anything, there's good quality and there's bad quality material that you can pick up out there. Getting a little feedback here.
That's not fun. Yeah, the other problem with that, too, is you don't want to get the stuff that's been on the shelf for a long time, because it will actually start to flatten out, and then it doesn't feed right either. Mm-hmm. So you have to get it from someplace that it turns over fairly quickly. So you can get this from even the big box home improvement stores are starting to carry some of it as well. And I don't think I'd want to buy it, because I don't know how they've handled those materials and how badly it's out of spec.
So you guys are saying the filament itself, it's soft enough that over time it just gravity flattens it out a little bit? Is that?
Well, and heat too.
Well,
Okay.
part
And
of
it'll
it
pick up
is how you
moisture
store
from
it.
the environment as well, which will cause issues with the extruder.
Yeah. You definitely don't want to get moisture in your filament because it will cause problems with your extruder. You'll get clogs. This one that I'm holding in my hand is actually one of those PLA wood filaments. I haven't used it yet. It's just a sample, but Scott had said, does it come in a sheet? Well, no, it doesn't. It comes in these little spools, not like this. A spool the size that Chad had. That's what they normally come in. But this is what they look like. They're just kind of like little spaghetti threads of plastic. And I get mine from Amazon.
This is unopened, and I'm not going to open it for the show because I don't want moisture to get in
exactly.
there. But
Yeah.
You can
That's
see
why I haven't opened this guy yet.
In there, the thread. So it's a 2-pound roll.
And then, Jeff, what was the approximate cost of build for you on that TARDIS that he had?
What's the cost of a 6-pack of Supper Club? That's how much. No, I'm kidding. The cost of the TARDIS in material was just over like $8. It took 16 hours to print the whole thing. It was $8, so not bad. Probably spent almost that much in shipping it. So I'm not that cheap.
Well, and this is one of the issues is almost always something that's going to be mass-produced is cheaper than 3D printing it yourself. If nothing else, it's going to not have the error rates. However, by the time you start getting into doing the transportation and whatnot, then that starts to change a little bit.
Oh yeah.
So you don't know. Manufacturing-wise, 3D printing is not really a viable solution for mass-produced stuff yet.
Correct.
Because it is too expensive. However, the whole point is 3D printing.
Prototyping tool.
Right,
Yeah,
or it's for the stuff that can't be injection molded, or it's for smaller
creators,
ones.
artists.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff that it actually is good for, but mass producing is still cheaper through other methods.
So one of his questions was, how much does a filament cost? You can get filaments that are as cheap as $20. And like Chad said, you're going to want to look at the reviews because, I've gotten some really bad spools of filament. They're tangled up, they get knotted during the print, and, you're screwed. You got to start all over again, untangle it, that sort of thing. But then there's also filament that can cost up to $150. There's some really expensive stuff out there. If you go to MakerBot's website, they have a flexible filament, and I want to say that's $150. There's the copper filament. Copper is pretty pricey. That stuff I want to say is around $70. And there's tons and tons of different filament types. Depending on the material that they're blended with, they can be pretty expensive.
All right, let's move on because we are running long and we have one last audio feedback that we want to get to.
This is Randy of JR and Juju from southeastern New Mexico. And my question for episode 219 is, what is the difference between 3D printers that build up material and 3D printers that cut down material? And what are the pros and cons of?
All right, so we kind of talked about that a little bit.
You were trying to do the segue there, and then I interrupted you. Sorry about that.
No worries. But yeah, it's most common for the 3D printers to actually have the additive where it's building up, because that way you go through less material. And if you're trying to mill out like a CNC machine would, then you're not going to be able to do some of the cuts and stuff that you would be able to do in an additive process, and you're wasting a lot more material. So that's kind of the summary as I understand it. Do you guys have anything else?
I would say that the cut down, the CNC type, you're going to have a much more solid material. Yes, you're going to use a lot more material, and it's going to cost a lot more money in terms of material, but it's going to be a more solid product.
Oh yeah, you're using blocks of wood, metal, sheets of metal, blocks of metal, whatever. You're using those solid materials. So yeah, and then like Daryl said earlier, that's the type of thing that you're going to use for mass producing something. You're going to do the subtractive method.
And subtractive method's going to be a lot faster. Because you're when you're doing the extrusion, it's very, very thin layers at a time.
Yeah, and of course this also depends on the process and everything else, but yeah, almost everything that you're going to find in the 3D printer space right now is at FDM style. Yeah, which is the filament being melted in that head and squirted out. And I think that's kind of why it got the term 3D printer, because it works a lot like the plotters do, like your inkjet printer does. So it works very much like a printer, and you get a 3D thing out of it.
That Glowforge that Dano linked for us, that's subtractive. There's another one out there called the Boxy. That one, apparently, I think it's got interchangeable parts, so it could be a 3D printer, additive printer, or it could have the laser cutter, it could have the miller on there, cut, so it's cutting into metal or wood. Pretty cool. That costs almost $4,000 for that guy.
Wow.
Yeah, but you're kind of getting two devices in one there. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the promise of that one had been you're getting those multiple devices so you can pick and choose the best stuff for the best things.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Limax in the live Q&A says that melting and squirting sounds messy.
I wouldn't call it squirting, really. It's kind of
dripping.
Yeah. If it's squirting, you've got issues.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, I think your temperature's a little too high there.
Yeah. One of the problems that you'll run into with this 3D printing stuff is getting like stringing and stuff that doesn't cool quick enough or cools too quickly. So it's not like you're just going to set this thing up and go. It's going to take some trial and error and testing stuff out. So it does take a lot of skill still, but it's very cool. And Sydney, Shermanator 18 says that you should spray the bed with hairspray, and Aquanet is hairspray of choice, as I understand it. The parks really stick well, so you won't have to pry them off with a chisel and hammer sometime.
I use Aquanet. I don't use tape at all. A lot of people will use that blue painter's tape.
Yep.
And it also depends on your bed. From what I understand, heated build plate, you can do that with some of the materials, the painter's tape or whatever. Forgot what it's called. There's a particular type of paint, but I just use Aquanet and it works beautifully for me.
And there's also this. It's a non-conductive material that's used in electronics. I can't remember the name of it. I should know it. I'm an engineer, but it really makes the stuff stick extremely hard. And you can get these in fairly large sheets that I can cover my glass. So I got glass that goes on top of the heat plate, and it sticks a lot harder than the hairspray. I normally use hairspray, but if I got something that's very long that I'm trying to print, those tend to curl up at the end. And if I really want it to stick, I get this guy out and get that done with this, because that stuff doesn't want to come off of this. So at the end, you have to practically chisel it off.
All right, thanks a lot, guys, for another very long episode with a lot of great information. And unfortunately, I don't think this was really long enough. This is
No,
one of those
no.
topics that could go on for days, I'm sure.
So that means that you'll be having these gentlemen back at some point in the future. Is that correct?
I'm sure we will. We'll have to figure out another date and time that everyone's willing to come back on. But in the meantime, Antaeus, where can people find more about what's going on your side of the world?
You know, I'm never prepared for that question.
Of course.
You can find me on Facebook, Jeff Arbaugh, or G+, same thing, Jeff Arbaugh. Or my caching name is Antaeus, so just use that geocaching user lookup and Anteaus. Send me a message if you're, if you want me to print you something, let me know.
And I was hoping that you might have had an Etsy store going.
No, not yet. I actually started looking into it, but eventually I'm planning on doing it.
And then Taz, I know we already mentioned the geocaching podcast, but anything else?
So I'm Taz427 on Twitter and Chad Courtney on Facebook. So anywhere you see Taz427, that's me.
Fantastic. Well, I think if I'm not mistaken, I have the honor of sharing with the GeoGearHeads listening to this episode, telling you how to get a free 1-year membership to one of my favorite websites, projectgc.com. By entering the question 222 drawing, you will get an entry, or maybe two, for that 365-day membership to projectgc.com. Now, question 222 is about working with law enforcement agencies, as opposed to what one of the contributors earlier to the show tends to work against them. But this is working with them. And since Daryl and Chris will be talking about that with Rock Chalk from geocaching.com on show 222. So send an email to geogearheads@cacheamaniacs.com with the title Question 222. In the body, make sure to include your geocaching.com screen name with your story about how you have worked with law enforcement. Maybe that's a great training event that you held at your local caching community, or something like a cool geocache at the police station. That's all it takes to get entered into the drawing, but there's a way to get a bonus entry. Oh yes, but wait, there's more. As we've been doing all year, if you share your entry in your own voice, you'll get two, not just one, but two entries into the drawing. And of course, you can record that audio file and email it to geogearheads@cacheamaniacs.com. And if you'd rather just place a phone call, use the voicemail line at 206-350-3647. Your deadline to have those entries in is March 29th, 2016 at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's 9 p.m. Eastern or 1 a.m. UTC on March 30th. So, good luck, and Chris and Daryl look forward to hearing those on the last GeoGearheads show of March.
Or, that might actually be the first show of April, Land Monkey. It kind of depends on when you're going to be basing it, whether it's a record date, the release date, or, maybe even, it's late enough, it might be April 1st in your part of the world at that point.
No fooling.
Yeah. No fooling. All right, so March 6th or 17th is our next show, and that one's going to be on logging, and we're honored to have Shermander 18 on that one. Then it's already time for another randomized show. We're going to do Randomize 44, and hopefully we'll have Michael Miller of Cache and Release on for that one. Then, as we just mentioned, 222 on March 31st is going to be law enforcement agencies with Rock Chalk of geocaching.com. Then, timely as it is, April 7th, we're going to be talking about the new geocaching app that was formerly the intro app with someone, though we haven't figured out whom, over at Groundspeak. So we've got 4 more great shows, lots of opportunity to send in your feedback for any of those by calling the voicemail line at 206-350-3647 or email us at geogearheads@cacheamaniacs.com.
That's right, and we want to remind you all to check the Cacheamaniacs website at cacheamaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes for this and all our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by calling 206-350-3647, by emailing geogearheads@cachamaniacs.com, or through the various social media channels. Your support helps keep the Cachamaniacs shows coming, so please consider becoming a patron through the link on our website to support the Cachamaniacs shows. GeoGearHeads is produced by Chris Umfenauer and Daryl Wattenberg. This show is copyright 2016 by Daryl Wattenberg. All rights reserved.